Boy, do I have a ton of great news for you. One, I'm going to go ahead and finally put out my build guide for the Black River Corpse Explosion prioritizing version of the Infinimist build. I'm going to be updating the max roll guide as well. Give me a little bit of time. You know, I'm only human. I got to make this video and the content and talk about the hotfix. So by this time tomorrow, the guide should be updated, but I at least want to get out this video guide because we got the best news possible. We're getting a hotfix, and Abattoir of Zero is going to be a lot more accessible to the majority of the player base. On top of that, they're maintaining the challenge for the ultra tryhard 1%ers, so we can each play the game in the way that we want to. Just as always, I'm going to have timestamps to everything below. First, we're going to talk about the hotfix. I'm going to go over the build. I'm going to include the gameplay footage so you at least know that I can put my stamp of approval on this thing. I got speed farming on tier 2. I just did a tier 9 with no shrines, which isn't the highest that this build is currently pushing. I think right now it's around tier 15 for some other players who are actually good at this video game, but I have all that waiting for you, so you feel free to skip around to whatever you want. We're going to talk about the patch notes for the hotfix because they just dropped. So I'm not going to go ahead and sit here and read the slideshow for you. You can go ahead and pause if you want to, but let's go over the very quick notes. Myself included, along with a ton of other partners, content creators, and just general people amongst the community, all agreed a couple things need to change about Abattoir of Zero if there's going to be any reason to grind this out by the end of the season. First and foremost, they're going to be increasing the glyph experience reward, and that's going to be starting at tier 2. So tier 1 is still going to be 1,000 experience, which is actually pretty reasonable. Anybody getting the glyph, getting the 1,000 experience, you'll be able to level it up a couple times. But starting as early as tier 2, they're going to be increasing the amount of experience that you get, which is going to continue to scale higher and higher on the higher tiers that you clear out. Just like I covered in my video and a ton of other people did, they're just going to be removing Suppressor and Vampirism. The funny part is, the gameplay that I'm about to show you in tier 9, I fought a Vampiric and a Suppressor in that fight, no shrines, killed them, so you know this build can already smash, and it's going to be even easier for other builds and similar build strengths to be able to do it now that they're removing these pretty horrific affixes when they were in combination, and the Bloodseeker fights, they were just like absolutely gross. Now, and I hate to drop into the meme, we got a little bit of Blizzard math here, so it's going to be hard to say exactly what the impact of this is, but what they're effectively saying is that everything below tier 10 should be moderately to significantly easier for people to clear as far as difficulty and damage reduction is concerned. We don't have exact numbers on that, but they basically said that the difficulty was ramping way too high starting at tier 1. I completely agree. So they're going to be looking at bringing that down, and then everything from tier 10 and above is going to maintain its current scaling. In addition to that, separately, we plan on reducing incoming damage by up to roughly 20% throughout all tiers of Abattoir of Zero. How are they going to accomplish that? Very challenging to understand unless we got like very specifics from the developers. I don't think that this necessarily means you can all of a sudden go drop damage reduction from your build, except for those immortal builds that are running around. But what it should basically mean is that your damage reduction, your total armor, your resistances, and your maximum life and barrier should get you about 20% more total efficiency than what it was getting you before. Maybe that's exactly what you needed to be able to survive those one shots that we're all just kind of dying to, but not exactly sure why. Now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the gameplay. I'm going to be showing you the tier 9 first off, just so you can get an idea of what the build is currently capable of, and the reason why I'm swapping Infinimist away from X-Falls and over to Black River and Corpse Explosion. I know, something you probably never expected to see me do. Now keep in mind here, depending on how much easier the Abattoir of Zero gets and or how easy it is to level the glyph, we may be able to pop back over to X-Falls, because the major issue that I was running into was my ability to continue to scale my damage without giving up any parts of the build, because a lot of people were going like, oh, if you drop Blood Mist and then you run 2 curses, you can put on the Damned aspect for a 50% damage multiplier, and that's all well and good, but that's not Infinimist. You kind of need Blood Mist to be Infinimist. And out of all of the different recommendations that I was getting, basically it all required you to change the base functionality of this build to just be a different build, which isn't terrible. There might just be a literally stronger build out there, but if you're like me and you want to play the Infinimist build, you like relying on both the Blood Mist and the Bone Storm with Shielding Storm to effectively have 2 separate sources of immunity, then the change that we're going with here needed a damage source which could be scaled further. And the only type of damage that we could be doing that we weren't previously scaling was Corpse Explosion damage. While X-Falls obviously has a huge base amount of damage, which is very easy to scale in the typical scenarios, the amount of damage reduction and the amount of survivability that we have to put into our Paragon board, in our skills, as well as on our gear, basically meant we were running out of aspect slots, and damage was definitely the weak link of the build. I could absolutely sit there with a Shaco and Doombringer and infinitely survive Bloodseekers, and then I would run out of time on the clock. So to be able to scale our damage further, we have to throw in Black River. Black River is going to give us that huge multiplier for the corpse explosion damage, and since these monsters actually have enough life to make ramping up your damage worthwhile, it means that we're not really losing any excess damage here. We're not being inefficient. Where X-Falls is going to pop things very quickly, Black River is going to give us that sustained damage that will allow us to continue to scale and allow us to push deeper and deeper into boss health pool so that all of our immunity actually amounts to something. Since we don't need to use X-Falls, we get to have an additional offensive aspect slot, so we're not losing out on Ultimate Shadow. And this is really important because we're going to be using Howl from Below for an additional damage multiplier here. Hard to get 40% damage multiplier on your gear at this point in the game, considering Blighted is always going to be on your amulet, but Howl from Below helps to maintain that damage moving with us, again just gaining more efficiency, losing out on less opportunities for damage as well as lucky hit procs. The last part about damage scaling that is actually really important here is that we can get additional ranks to our main damage skill on our pants without sacrificing survivability. Typically you would be using Tybalt's Will, a 1.4 times multiplier, which is great, don't get me wrong, but it only has 1 damage reduction from close stat, and then on top of that doesn't have total armor or maximum life, so we're losing out on additional bonuses from barrier generation and finding it harder to be able to cap our total armor. And because we're not using Tybalt's, it also means, depending on how you want to run this build, you could technically put Shaco on the helmet, which I'm not currently doing, but it's definitely one of the options. Alright, enough of me talking about it. Let me very quickly go over the aspects and the stats that are important on the piece of the gear that might be a little bit nuanced here. Then we'll go over the Book of the Dead, the skill tree, and the Paragon board, etc. And again, I'm going to get the planner updated. It's going to be a little bit after this video comes out. Promise I'll give you enough time so you can actually see it on the screen. I'll try to make it as easy as possible so you can follow it here. Then I'll get to work on the planner. The reason why we're not currently using Shaco is because I'm looking for an additional source of lucky hit chance. We're using both Flicker Step and Lidless Wall for maintaining permanent uptime on Bone Storm, because I'm still relying on this a little bit. It is definitely a crutch. I'm hoping that by tomorrow our ability to scale our damage even harder and a bit of an easier time getting through the abattoirs here means I could drop back onto Greaves of the Empty Tomb and or a set of legendary boots with either the Exploiters aspect on it, which has made its way up into the upper echelon of just much more valuable legendary aspect to be able to put onto a piece of gear. But until that point, until I'm comfortable, lucky hit chance on the helmet as well as the total armor means that we can actually reach the armor cap even without disobedience, although I'm leaving disobedience on just for those hidden affixes and hopefully not getting armor breaker randomly and getting one tapped by things I shouldn't be. Also lets us stack on maximum life, and then on top of that a resistance stat here. The resistance stat here allows us to add additional skulls to our jewelry and not have to sacrifice the defenders and instead get to hold on to this really valuable 1.25 multiplier, because remember that this gets boosted by Memento Mori in our skill tree. For the aspect, we're putting on the Void so that we can use Blight as an additional crowd control effect. This is very valuable considering you don't always have corpse tendrils up. For the armor, nothing interesting here. Total armor, maximum life, damage reduction from close, damage reduction from shadowed. Here's where we're putting Shielding Storm. Again, we're using Howl for Blow because they're just phenomenal on this build. For the pants, total armor, maximum life, damage reduction from close. You could swap out life for more damage reduction to shadowed, but I'm looking to pick up those 4 ranks to corpse explosion to better scale our damage. Right now we only have a rank 16 corpse explosion with this. I don't currently have any on my amulet, and again we're not using Shaco, but still rank 16 corpse explosion is more than enough damage considering we're scaling it in so many different ways. Here's where I'm currently running disobedience. If you're just some god gamer and you have like perfect armor rolls on 925 armor, feel free to remove disobedience from this point. Then you can toss on an additional survivability aspect here, whether that's literally the protective bubble that just makes you immune for 5 seconds just as another tool to be able to weaponize against the Bloodseekers if you happen to get a really nasty combination of affixes, or being able to move Shielding Storm down to here, so again you can actually put Exploiters either on your helmet or your chest for that additional crowd control length and an additional multiplier the moment that your crowd control forces monsters to become unstoppable. Flicker Step is helping to maintain permanent Bone Storm even once we are fighting the Blood Bloodseekers. While you're able to generate Bone Storms from Lidless Wall, I found that Flicker Step gave me a lot of opportunity for continuing to maintain multiple Bone Storms across the entirety of the combat scenario. The moment that the Sorceress teleports away or the Barbarian decides to just leap out of there for no damn reason, this is a really good survivability option. But again, once I feel a little bit more comfortable, definitely going back to Greaves of the Empty Tomb for that straight up damage reduction from shadowed targets so that we don't have to be close, as well as essence cost reduction for Blight, more evade charges just to make combat feel a lot more smooth, and then the additional lucky hit as well. For the amulet, total armor and 2 damage reductions here. You could swap out one of the damage reductions for mobility. I just haven't found mobility to actually be that valuable, even when we're only using single evade and single movement speed boots like Flicker Step. But then 3 ranks to Gloom, or if you're going for even more damage, you could swap out damage reduction here for ranks to Corpse skills to further push Corpse Explosion, and this is obviously where we're going to be putting Blighted. Sacrilegious Soul, I made a comment a while ago when we were talking about like regular content where you're not sitting there like perma fighting 3 targets all at the same time, where you would want a longer cooldown for the aspect of Sacrilegious Soul, maybe a 2-second cooldown, so you could actually generate enough corpses with Black River. Luckily, we have 3 targets to be triggering off of, so I do not feel the need to have less than a perfect roll on Sacrilegious here, but you want to prioritize the lucky hit chance and the corpse skill, and then maximum life. Maximum essence obviously doesn't really matter to us. Now for the ring, I do not have a perfect ring at this point. I'm kind of close, right? So we want lucky hit chance, maximum life, damage to close, and then either damage to vulnerable or any other valuable stat for your current build or setup. And then here's where we're putting ultimate shadow. If you're not using Howl from Below, or Lidless Wall, and you're asking the question, what is an additional offensive aspect that I can put onto the build right now? You can either go with Conceited for the 25% damage multiplier across the entirety of the time, but I would highly recommend going with Blood Soaked, the one that says that Blood Mist leaves behind desecrated ground and no longer slows you down. This ability to be able to use Blood Mist to get out of the overlapping AoE damage sources that are so often the bane of my existence while fighting the Bloodseekers cannot be overstated. It is incredibly valuable. And then on top of that, being able to stack additional damage over time effects not only keeps our Blighted up to date as soon as possible, stacks on more Shadow Blight, but on top of that is triggering Lucky Hit at a really high rate so that you can continue to over-generate corpses so you can get the most out of Black River on every cast. Then I don't really have to introduce Black River in Lidless Wall. You could be swapping Lidless Wall out for a focus with dual lucky hit chance and lucky hit chance with barrier, cooldown reduction, and then damage reduction from shadowed. You can also be going with a couple different options there. Hell, you can even be using a shield to again get exploiters back onto your build, and then use damage reduction, maximum life, and dual lucky hit chance. I have a couple options for shields that I'll be messing around with. Chronix reminded me that, hey, we could be using shields a lot, and while I went with a purely offensive shield because I figured Lidless Wall would be the best defensive shield, you can definitely make an argument for like triple damage reduction or double damage reduction and lucky hit chance or cooldown reduction. There's a lot of really cool options for shields out there right now. And then obviously Black River. Now that was a huge info dump. Let's try to get through the rest of it a little bit faster. We're still sacrificing Reapers for the Shadow since we do not need any resistances. We're actually even overcapped on resistances, so we're able to pull an additional skull into our jewelry and pull a couple nodes out of our Paragon board. But how much resistance and armor you need at any given time is going to be very tailored to your build. The cool part here though is that you could be using either the magic resistance elixir or the armor elixir that you can craft at the alchemist to be able to make up for any difference in these stats that you might have. The only real elixir that's valuable to us is actually the lucky hit elixir, and you need to run Helltide to get this. So you can either run more maximum life, total armor, or total elemental resistances, and then play around a bit with the rest of your gear. You'll just be tied to the elixirs, which isn't ideal, but it's something that you can be doing if your gear isn't up to snuff. Then we're going to be sacrificing cold for the additional damage against vulnerable. And then I just realized that we're currently sacrificing Iron Golem, which does absolutely nothing for us because we don't really crit, except off of Shadow Blight, which isn't nothing, but it's not really good. So we're going to be swapping over to Blood for the additional maximum life here. That puts my character at a whopping 19,000 life without Doombringer. So it's actually like pretty disgusting considering we can generate barrier up to this amount as well. The skill tree is nothing new. I'm just going to go through it very quickly. Only 1 point into Blight. We want to get the 15% additional damage with Blight, max out Hued Flesh, max out Blood Mist. Blood Mist creates corpses, max out Corpse Explosion with Blighted. We're maxing out Grim Harvest as well as Fueled by Death because we need to be able to generate all of our essence through consuming corpses. That's our only way of doing it. Just 1 point into Decrepify with Abhorrent, still incredibly relevant for the build. Do not sleep on prioritizing casting Decrepify because remember, reducing the incoming damage of the monster is a straight up 20% reduction in total damage, whereas your damage reductions all multiply against one another. Amplify is good, Death's Embrace is good, maxing out everything that we can in the shadow passives. Only 1 point into Crippling Darkness. This legitimately does not proc enough for you to actually like rely on it over Corpse Tendrils, and we're already dropping the Bloodseekers into Unstoppable anyway, so this really isn't going to do anything. And we only need the 1 point into Reaper's Pursuit because the mobility is no longer an issue when you're in AoZ. Just 1 point into Corpse Tendrils along with the Plague Corpse Tendrils for Vulnerable, maxing out Standalone, Memento Mori, Bone Storm, and then obviously Shadow Blight. Now the Paragon board, I've gone over and over and over and over and over again, swapping out points here and points there, etc., etc. The things that you want to very quickly check on for your own character, because this is going to be important for maxing out the stats that you need. When you're looking at your resistances, remember that the total number, you currently have 124.9. That means that 124.9 minus the 50 from being in World Tier 4 means that I'm realistically at 74.9% resistance on cold right now. I'm at 81.9 for poison. I'm at 74.9 for shadow. I'm at 102.6 for lightning, and I'm at 86.9 for fire. What that means is you may be able to pull out small amounts of additional Paragon nodes. You'll notice here, I'm not picking up 2 resistance nodes. You'll notice down here, I'm not picking up a resistance node either. You absolutely need to check whether or not you need every one of these resistance nodes, because that's how you're going to pull out just enough points to be able to make it over to additional total armor or additional total armor. Or be able to sneak in, come up into this board and be able to actually get a 40 intelligence node here. So just check that when you're doing your own specialization, when you're doing your own optimizations here. But if you're following it exactly to my gear, putting Sacrificial in the main board, maxing out this node, maxing out Resilience, and then picking up everything that's important for knowledge as well as preservation. Into Flesh Eater, picking up every core stat around the glyph of Tears of Blood. Right now, my Tears of Blood is only a tier 7. I'm picking up Erudite, and I'm building down this way to be able to save out on nodes, picking up everything around targeted, obviously picking up Flesh Eater. We no longer need crit, so it's nice to not have to be able to build into this. Building over to Poison Condition is actually super important because it's very easy to get Shadow Res as well as Poison Res in our Paragon, and then that means the other 3 resistances can be handled by your jewelry and or the different ways that I just showed you that you can max it out either with the elixir or a different sacrifice from your skeletons. And then Snap Cut, I actually re-optimized my board so I can hit every single rare node that I wasn't hitting previously because I had lost some all stats, and I saved us additional points. So I'm just going to very quickly cut this in here. So this board's going to look a little bit different than it did a quick second ago. From Flesh Eater, we build into Wither. We're going to build from Wither as close to the gate as possible because it's the most efficient way to actually go through the entirety of this board, picking up everything around Dragging Shadows, everything around Lingering Shadows, and then everything around Gnawing Darkness. From Gnawing Darkness, we're going to build it down because this allows us to get over to the intelligence quickly and be able to path out at a 5 node distance here. This is where we're going to be putting in Scourge, and we're actually maxing out Scourge since it's actually much more valuable than Darkness as far as the additive damage is concerned. The shadow damage over time works just as effectively as Darkness damage for our Corpse Explosion, and then this goes even further to be a multiplier for our Shadow Blight damage, which isn't very substantial, but it's a little bit of additional scaling damage there. Obviously picking up the Gloom node because we need that to hit our Shadow Res cap, but we're going to be maxing out Malediction and all of the Shadow nodes around here. Then pathing back out, we're going to be coming up into Scent of Death, and we're coming out of the top, I like to think about it, because we want to be hitting a minimum investment for control. We want to build up into Preservation for the additional dex. Then you'll notice that I need a single 7 dex node right here, so we can hit exactly 430 dexterity for all of the rare nodes that we actually care about, so we can get the total armor here. building over into the legendary node, you'll see we build down into Deathbringer, but we don't need to max this one out because getting the bonus would give us more damage to injured and not additional armor. We don't care about that at all. Then coming out of the bottom of here, we're going to build down into Bone Graft. We're using Bone Graft because one, we want to get a minimum investment intelligence node here for darkness. The shadow damage is okay. This is much more for the damage reduction against shadowed targets. Since that's going to stick on the target the moment that we move at a close distance, we're not going to lose this damage reduction as opposed to something like Territorial. But because it's an intelligence node, it also benefits us to build up into Erudite. And Erudite, along with the 2 magic nodes right here for a res, is exactly what you're going to need if you have the same gear as me, to be able to max out all of your resistances with minimum investment, with only using 2 gems and not having to sacrifice defenders instead. So this is a significantly more optimized board than what I was showing previously. I think I regained something like 30 or 40 additive damage as well as 100 armor, but I wanted to very quickly tuck that into the video because I didn't want to update it later and then confuse you all. All right, back to the previous video. There you go. That is the Corpse Explosion version of Infinimist. It's using Black River. It has a ton of overlapping survivability. It's able to put out a really good amount of scalable damage. It should have a much easier time progressing after the hotfix goes live tomorrow. And hopefully the majority of people who are kind of struggling can actually get in here and enjoy the content, or at least see it for the first damn time. The saddest part about the induction of the Abattoir of Zir in this season is that while it was completely advertised as the hardest of the hardest content that had been in Diablo 4 up until this point, that doesn't change the fact that most people at least expect to be able to walk in the door and do tier 1. And the fact that a lot of people were suffering or were unable to do so meant that a bunch of people didn't get new content added to the game. So at the very least, I hope you're able to get in, get your glyph, try out the first couple of tiers, maybe grind a little bit and push, really flex your strength on your build. How good is it? How good is your gear? Let me know what you think. I hope that you enjoyed the build. Again, look for the update on Max Roll shortly. I'm a human, I gotta eat, I gotta sleep. Eventually I gotta look away from this computer, but I wanted to get this out to people because I know you're gonna wanna be jumping in tomorrow and sinking your teeth into hopefully a much more reasonable AoZ experience. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to bring you this level of content as often as I can while also streaming. I now stream both on Twitch and on YouTube. So if you've never been able to catch my streams live on YouTube, or you just don't use Twitch, I typically stream Monday through Friday, 1 to 7 p.m. ET. Obviously we go to a bit longer when either like a season's going live or new content is out. I think on the first AoZ day, I streamed for over 12 hours on both platforms. So I'd love to see you there if you're not already. Consider leaving a like on this video as well if you think it was well done, or if you think you gained something from it, or if you're going to be saving it to optimize your build tomorrow. I'd love to hear from you. What are your experiences been? What are you excited for? What are you going to be trying tomorrow? And once you get into the Abattoir of Zir, let me know about your accomplishments. I want to hear people enjoying this content because it's been a rough couple of days. I think we can all agree we'd much prefer to be enjoying playing the Diablo game as opposed to just screaming about it on the internet. But thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helps, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.